Welcome back to BetterAvecBourbon. Today we have a tasting flight of one of the more storied bourbon brands, Old Forester. Established in 1870, Old Forester claims to be the first bottled bourbon. Looking at their website, they sell 17 different products, but today we'll be focusing on the 3 bourbons I've got in this Old Forester Whiskey Row gift pack. Old Forester 1897 Bottled in Bond Whiskey, Old Forester 1910 Old Fine Whiskey, and Old Forester 1920 Prohibition Style Whiskey. The Old Forester Distilling Company is in Louisville, Kentucky, produced by the Brown-Forman Corporation, also based in Louisville, Kentucky, who alongside Old Forester manufactures Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, and GlenDronach among others. Interestingly, Old Forester spells whiskey without an E, which is more in line with the British and Canadian spellings of whiskey, as compared with the Irish and American spelling that contains the E. But enough about spellings, let's unbox it. The sample box costs about $60 USD, and as mentioned contains 3 bourbons with, according to sources other than Old Forester, mash bills of 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% malted barley, making them high rye bourbons favoring spice over sweeter high wheat bourbons. The 1910 Old Fine Whiskey is 46.5% ABV, 93 proof. The bottle provides a brief history of this style. In 1910, a fire in Whiskey Row led to Old Forester being rebottled into heavily charred barrels. The double-barreled expression follows the same process of the original Old Fine Whiskey. It comes in at $64.99 at Total Wine. The 1920 Prohibition style comes in at 57.5% ABV, or 115 proof, and the bottle reads, "During Prohibition, Old Forester was bottled as medicinal whiskey at 117 West Main Street under Kentucky Permit Number 3. The typical proof at the time prior to bottling was 115 proof. It comes in at $63.99 at Total Wine." The 1897 Bottled in Bond is 50% ABV, or 100 proof. Originally produced in Louisville's Kentucky Row, this whiskey embraced the definition of the Act, introduced in 1897, which inspired high-quality standards for the spirits industry. It comes in at about $30 at Total Wine. Once you've got your Whiskey Row flight, let's get to it. Starting off, let's open the 1897. Old Forester 1897 Bottled in Bond was made to honor the U.S. Bottled in Bond Act of 1897 and follows the Bottled in Bond standards that whiskey must be aged in a federally bonded warehouse for at least 4 years, the product of one distillation season, from one distiller at one distillery, and bottled at 100 proof. Prior to the Bottled in Bond Act, Old Forester was bottled at 90 proof. These standards were put in place to distinguish quality-made bourbons from their cheap, misleading counterparts. Next, the 1910. On October 22nd, a fire interrupted Old Forester production, forcing mature whiskey that was ready to be bottled to instead be stored in another barrel. This resulted in a new expression of Old Forester, their Old Fine Whiskey. This entry mimics the historic process, and by entering the second barrel at 100 proof, the 1910 presents sweet, deep flavors of oak, for a smoother expression, finishing at 93 proof. Next, the 1920. When the Volstead Act of 1920 was implemented, it began prohibition in the USA, while also granting permits to 6 distillers in Kentucky, including Old Forester, in order for them to continue bottling bourbon for medicinal purposes, which allowed Old Forester production to continue throughout prohibition as a medicinal whiskey. All medicinal whiskeys were required to be bottled at 100 proof, and due to the angel share, which refers to 2 to 5% of whiskey that evaporates annually during the maturation process, it would finish as a 115 proof whiskey by the end of maturation. This bourbon was made to honor that historic period. Now that we've had some history, let's get to tasting. Starting with the aromas. For the 1897, Old Forester says we should get a classically styled bourbon profile with robust, intense caramel and vanilla bean, complemented by dried fruits, sweet leather, and cured tobacco. For my nose, I get the green apple and leather from a new oak barrel, and deep vanilla and caramel. Very classic bourbon notes. For For the 1910, Old Forester says we should get interlaced layers of buttercream, sticky toffee, baked apple, and a hint of roasted coffee beans. For my nose, I get an explosion of toffee, caramel with a little oak in the background, but overall quite rich smelling. I don't get baked apple, but I do always get a prevalent green apple note from high rye bourbons. For the 1920, Old Forester says an intense medley of cherry preserves, chewy caramel, dark chocolate, thickened maple syrup, and candied spice nuts. I personally don't get any of this complexity. As for me, my notes are similar to the 1897, but with a lot more ethanol. Green apple, leather, vanilla, and caramel. I don't get the aforementioned dessert flavors. Now let's get to tasting. For the 1897, Old Forester says, sticky toffee and smoky wood tones leave the flavor with figs, dates, and raisins offering dimension. Black pepper and cinnamon spice provide structure and texture, and for finish, deep fruit, spice, and oak notes layered over caramel and vanilla. Big, bold, and classic with leather and cured tobacco as it lingers on. For my taste, I get green apple, maybe even some apricot, and some oak smoke. Admittedly, it's more complex than it smells. For the 1910, Old Forester says we should get smooth, well-rounded mingling of sweet oatmeal raisin cookie, leading into warm cinnamon spice, nutmeg, and mocha. For finish, viscous yet slightly dry with peripheral spice and smoky charred oak. For my taste, I get a nice blend of oak and toffee. It has more bite than the nose indicates, but overall a great dram with a really great mouthfeel. For the 1920, Old Forester says dark caramel coats layers of malt nuttiness, chocolate and nougat, all warmed by rye spice, and brightened with a hint of cedar. And for finish, a long decadent finish full of toasted coconut, dark chocolate, charred marshmallow, and seasoned oak spice. For my taste, lots of oak, lots of bite. There's some sweetness there, but overall it's 1897 with more ethanol and lacks the richness of the 1910. I know a lot of people like this one, so feel free to let me know I'm wrong down below. Now that I've got my notes on the aroma and taste for each, let's rank them. First for me goes to the 1910. As someone who prefers an old-fashioned with Demerara syrup, the rich toffee and caramel flavors of this one really hit the spot for me. For number 2, I have the 1897. It's a pretty accessible bourbon, has a nice proof, and it makes a good old-fashioned. Which leaves the 1920 Prohibition style in last. I really wanted to like this one, as this is actually the second time I've had this bottle, but I just don't get the rewarding flavors Old Forester notes. Perhaps this just isn't the format for trying it, given the higher proof. Thanks everyone for watching. Do you have a favorite bottle of Old Forester? Or do you have a go-to cocktail for the 1920? Let me know down below. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, hit that like button, press subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.